Hi, welcome back. This is FSX 404. Today I'm going to go over some basic conventional gear or taildragger airplanes. In flight, there's no difference between a taildragger and a tricycle gear airplane, but on the ground, while taxiing, taking off, and landing, the two airplanes are very different. The taildragger ground operations are much more complex and require a lot more concentration. We'll start out with a taxi, and as you can see, the tail low arrangement does not allow for a good front visibility, since you don't want to be guessing at where you're going, and not cheating in a Microsoft Flight Simulator by removing the cockpit altogether so you can see. We'll do nice, slow S-turns to our destination. Once we get close to the runway, then we can use one side of the taxiway edge line to lead us onto the runway. One thing you want to remember about those tail draggers is that you don't want to use those brakes abruptly. You might just do a tail over and crush yourself. The takeoff in a tail dragger is very different than the takeoff in a tricycle airplane. Once you're lined up with the center line of the runway, smoothly advance the throttle to full power, and as you're advancing the throttle, push the flight stick smoothly to the full forward position. As the tail starts lifting, release a little bit of that front pressure just to keep the nose of the plane horizontal. For a tail dragger, it's going to take a lot of rudder work to keep it on the center line. Rotate slowly at 55 knots and put the nose of the airplane on the horizon for the initial climb. Once you reach a safer altitude, you can pitch the airplane for a 65 to 70 knot climb. The pattern flown in the Citabria is the same as it is for a Cessna 172. The airspeed on downwind past the threshold will be 70 knots, the base will be 65 knots, and the final will be 60 knots. As always, the airspeed will be controlled by the pitch of the airplane. Now the landings. There are two types of landings available on a tail dragger. The first one, and the easier one, is a 3-point landing. This landing is generally used for calm conditions and no crosswind. We're a little high, but that's okay. This runway is very long. There are a few things important to remember about a 3-point landing. As we start to flare, we'll level off the plane for a second or two, and as the plane starts sinking, we'll add a little back pressure to keep it floating as long as it wants to. And as soon as the airplane touches down, we want all three wheels to be on the ground as soon as possible. After the touchdown, that flight stick needs to come all the way back until the airplane is fully stopped. Only once the airplane is slowed down enough, tap the brakes gently until the plane fully stops. Now let's take an outside view and see what a 3-point landing looks like from the outside. The 2-point landing requires a lot more coordination. 2-point landings are used when landing in crosswind or air turbulence. The approach speeds are the same, 70 knots in downwind, 65 on base, 60 knots on final. There are a few important things to remember about a 2-point landing. Unlike the 3-point landing, once we start the flare and level off for a second or two, we don't want to add as much back pressure as on a 3-point landing. Once the 2 front wheels touch down, we'll move the flight stick into the full front position to keep that tail up in the air. Again, we'll need a lot of rudder work to keep the airplane on the center line. Let the tail drop on its own. Once the tail drops, we'll move the stick into a full back position. Only once the airplane is slowed down enough, we'll tap on the brakes and stop the airplane fully. Just for the hell of it, I'll show you how to do a proper aileron roll in a Citabria. Now remember, this is not an F-16 or even a Spitfire. You have to be a lot more precise with what you're doing, because you don't have all that power to work with. To do an aileron roll, we need to be over an open area and actually have a parachute in real life. We'll start by putting the Citabria in a shallow dive to pick up some speed. Once the airplane reaches 120 knots, we'll pitch the plane up about 20 degrees nose high and apply full left stick. Keep the full left stick in until you have completed 3/4 of a turn, and then center the stick. As you see, the airplane wings have leveled off correctly. Now let's try an aileron roll to the right. Again, let's put the airplane in a shallow dive. At 120 knots, we'll pitch the airplane up 20 degrees nose high and add full right stick. Keep that full right stick in until 3/4 of the turn is completed. At 3/4 of the turn, center the stick, and as you can see, the wings are level again. That was some basic conventional gear or tail dragger operation.